Good evening, everyone. Late Night Mega here, and tonight we're playing an Esper control deck in Modern. That's right, we've kind of gone full circle now on this journey, and we're kind of back to where we began with an Esper Drago. But first off, I just want to apologize. I know it's been a long time since I've posted one of these Magic Deck Tech videos. And so for all of you who have been patiently waiting, I thank you so much. I've just been like, every time I went to go and record this deck has been ready for like a couple months now. And anytime I go to record, I ended up having like other recording issues with one of my other projects, or I have to go re-record stuff, or issues in editing, or Yu-Gi-Oh! Came out for the PC, and so I was excited to record that, and so I've just been getting distracted by a lot of other things that I would dedicate my recording time to. But to make up for that, I've got like 4 decks to show you guys, and we're going to be pumping those out probably all within the next week or two is my goal. So we're kind of back to where we began, and I kind of mentioned last time that this deck was going to be like a culmination of things from my other Modern decks, whether it's like deck building patterns or certain ratios on stuff. And so I've been saying that I've been wanting to get back to Esper Charm in just an Esper control deck for Modern. And one of the big issues, one of the big things that have been keeping me away from Esper is Tron. Esper just doesn't deal with Tron as well as other control strategies. It doesn't have red, so it doesn't have Crumble to Dust. It can't put on a huge pressure clock. You could try and do the Ghost Quarter surgical thing, but unless you're running 4 Ghost Quarters and 3 surgicals, the 3 surgicals being in the board, it's not going to be as good as like the blue-white Shadow of Doubt deck. And in the end, I just kind of had to accept that this deck wasn't going to be strong against Tron, and instead focus on just having a strong Esper control deck that's good against pretty much the rest of the field, with a few other weird exceptions. We'll get into that in a little bit. First, I want to talk about how I decided to come back to this deck, and I was looking at my blue-white Tron deck, which ran 7 counter spells that could come online at 2 mana, and looking back at blue-white Shadow of Doubt, even though I only ran 2 Think Twice there, it always felt really good when I was going into turn 2. I had 2 mana up, I passed the turn, and I have like a Mana Leak and a Think Twice in hand, and I always felt like I was in a really good spot. So I wanted to replicate that here. And so I bumped up to 3 Think Twice, and you'll see that I have 3 Mana Leak, 3 Remand, only 6 counters that come online with 2 mana, and it was the 7th 2 mana counter spell here was card 61 that I ended up having to cut down for this deck. And you'll see some other weird things in this list. We will get to those, I promise you. And so you'll also notice that I've cut down to 3 Think Twice, only 1 Sphinx's Revelation, only 3 Cryptics because, what was it? Cruel Ultimatum, that only ran 3 Cryptic commands, and it operated just fine on that. So I figured, well, why not here? And we do have an Elspeth Sun's Champion. So you'll see that, and we are running 25 lands, 25 being the number that blue-white Shadow of Doubt ran as well. And we'll get more into the mana base again in a little bit, but I don't want to call this strictly Drago, because if I do, the Esper Drago fan base will invade the comment section. They'll come out of the word woodworks and they'll just bash this because I'm running Lingering Souls and Elspeth, and I'm not running 4 Think Twice and 2 Sphinx's Revelation and 26 lands. I've totally messed up their whole 56 card main deck formula that they've been playing forever, and it's not really Drago, and it's awful because I'm tapping lands on my turn. But you know what? What I found is that Lingering Souls and Elspeth, the matches Lingering Souls is good against, they're really good against. And Elspeth, there's a lot of decks where you just drop an Elspeth, they're not going to be able to deal with it, and Elspeth is just going to ride you to victory. So yeah, maybe it's not strict Drago like the old Esper Drago deck that you guys first saw on here, but this deck wins more. And I'm going to take a success rate that wins more over adhering to a strict, straight-up Drago theme that just feels really awful to play. So that's why there's a lot of differences here compared to that deck, but still a lot of similarities because I am drawing on that as well. Another thing about building this deck that took me a while to come up with is I kept going like deep on Lingering Souls, like 3 or 4 copies. And then that made me want to play like Sorin Sound Visitor, Gideon Ally of Zendikar, all things I wanted to play, but then when I tried to cram all this token stuff in, I ended up not having enough for all the other things that I wanted to do with this deck, with the 2-mana counter spells, the Think Twice's, Esper Charms, all that. So I ended up going to 2 Lingering Souls. I do like that. I don't know, maybe there should be a 3rd copy in here somewhere. Let's go up to the creatures real quick. We have Teferi and Torrential Gearhulk, 2 very odd choices. The first week of this deck, I was running 2 Dragonlord Ojutais in this spot. And what I found with Ojutai is, well, after the first week, I swapped one out for Torrential Gearhulk because I wanted to try that in Modern, because it was sweet in my standard deck, and I wanted to give it a go in Modern, and it is pretty darn sweet in Modern as well. But Teferi came in, Ojutai, you know, he gets me the card advantage, but he does it when I'm already winning, and the cards I get off of Ojutai just feel like I'm running away with a game that I'm already winning, and that's not really what I need to be doing with this card slot. I need something that can help me against control and combo decks, because I was showing some weaknesses against those decks, whether it's Ad Nauseam or other like dedicated control decks that are running like Ancestral Vision, targeted discard like Inquisition, Thoughtseize, and Esper Charms, and a full play set of Lingering Souls. That kind of wrecks this deck. So I went with Teferi to kind of help against that. It's the deck is still kind of weak to those sort of strategies, but it feels a lot better than the Ojutai did. And at worst, this does come into play, you know, whenever you want. Bring it in on the end step. 4 toughness means it'll dodge lightning bolts and things like that. So it's not awful. He's not super great, but I do like his effect, and just the effect it has on the way my opponent has to play the rest of the game. And it just makes controlling and getting to the point of winning a bit easier than Dragonlord Ojutai, whereas Ojutai will be good to close out games faster. That's true with the 5 power, but card advantage wise, he's not going to help me come back from a game that I'm losing, whereas Teferi can help me more so with games that I'm struggling to get that full control grip on. Alright, so other cards in here, let's start talking about some of the wacky stuff. Blessed Alliance in the main deck. I wanted more removal in the main deck, and you know, it came down to Blessed Alliance. I know I'm recording this and posting this after Aether Revolt, so we have this card called Fatal Push, but that didn't even exist, or the spoiler didn't even exist for it when I was playing this deck. So I chose Blessed Alliance because I figured it could be relevant, and I did have Ojutai for a long time in here, so there's also the whole you can untap your Ojutai with it. I'm not sure I ever even did that. If I did, it was like maybe once. But gaining 4 life, relevant against aggro, burn, you know, what have you, and the sacrifice effects. You guys know how I love sacrifice effects. This time, the sacrifice effects are in the main deck, which made some Boggles players and Infect players kind of unhappy. Echoing Truth. Well, let's talk about Echoing Truth and Overwhelming Denial here at the same time. These two card slots were designed to be sort of my catch-all answers to any sort of permanent or thing my opponent played. And for a while, Overwhelming Denial was actually Anguished Unmaking. And I'll get into why I cut that, but I want to go back to Echoing Truth. This card has been amazing from the get-go. I loved having this in here as a one-of. It can bounce Planeswalkers that are about to ultimate. It can bounce, I think one of my favorite things I did with it against a Jund player, he's got a Liliana out there. It keeps plussing it up. And I still have a few cards in hand because, well, I'm Esper and I've got these Think Twices that I can discard and then flash them back, and Lingering Souls. So Jund is already not having a good time with this. But his hand is empty. He goes and pluses Liliana. I respond by using Echoing Truth to bounce his Liliana back to his hand. Then her +1 effect resolves and each player has to discard a card, so he's discarding his Liliana to its own effect, which I just found endlessly amusing. There was also a time my opponent had 3 Planeswalkers on the field, and a Johnny Vengeant, which was about to ultimate, Gideon Jura, and an Elspeth Sun's Champion. I mean, if you looked at the board state, it looked like he was about to just totally wreck me, and I had no hope of winning. I should not have won that game, but Echoing Truth helped me come back. I bounced his a Johnny back to his hand, used Esper Charm, make him discard it, and another card. And then turn or so later, I had my own Elspeth still pumping out tokens. And he also had a Torrential Gearhulk joining that crew as well. And then I ended up bouncing his Elspeth with Snapcaster Mage on the Echoing Truth, and then countering the Elspeth with a Mana Leak. And then a little while after that, I got the Gideon down, and yeah, I actually came back and won that game that looked like there should have been no hope whatsoever. So Overwhelming Denial. I wanted a counter spell that couldn't be countered, because I do like having those. Whenever I play the Jeskai colors, I do like to have those counter fluxes in there. Especially against, like, once again, Ad Nauseam was becoming a bad matchup for this deck. And someone seemed to be playing that at my local game store every week. So a counter spell that can't be countered, and also just in general, like if you're in a counter war or you tap mana at your opponent's end step to play Esper Charm or Think Twice or something, you know, this turns into a 2 mana uncounterable counter spell, and it just helps you win counter wars with control decks as well. So it's been nice, to say the least. And casting it for 4 mana, not the most awful thing in the world either. We're playing Draw Go Control. If you're not getting to 4 mana within the game, something is very wrong. And it's not Overwhelming Denial's fault. We've got the Supreme Verdicts. Those are pretty standard. And so let's go to the mana base. So the mana base, you know, once again, I took the 25 land idea. I also took the whole 5 lands coming into play tapped idea from the Blue-White Shadow of Doubt deck. So we've got the 3 Celestial Colonnades and 2 Shambling Vents, because once again, I wanted more life gain. And also having 5 man lands in this deck, you know, once this Esper deck, you get to the late game, you know, it just keeps coming and coming after you with threat after threat. You know, oh, here's an Elspeth. Oh, you finally found a way to deal with that. Well, here's some Lingering Souls tokens. Here's a Torrential Gearhulk. You know, you're still dealing with that stuff. Here's some man lands too. I found this deck to be very super resilient. You know, there's a lot of times my opponents got me down to like 1 to 4 life, and then I still end up coming back and winning. Just because of how resilient this deck is and how it can just keep going and going and going. And that's one of the reasons I feel really comfortable with it. Oh, I showed off the sideboard a little too early. That's okay. So yeah, we've got 5 man lands because we had 5 comes into play tap lands in Blue-White Shadow of Doubt, so I'm mirroring that. We've got 6 fetches this time, 3 Flooded Strands, 3 Polluted Deltas. I didn't want to go with the 7 fetches because I Again, against burn aggro decks, which are really popular in my area, I wanted ways to, mitigate, lower the damage in my mana base as much as possible while still maintaining some consistency. Overall, I wasn't too disappointed with this mana base. And we have a couple Ghost Quarters dealing with man lands, Tron lands. If the 2 Ghost Quarters isn't really going to be enough for that deck on a consistent basis. But like I said, I kind of gave up the Tron match, just kind of accepted that, I do have a couple Surgicals on the board, but 2 Surgicals, 2 Ghost Quarters. Can't fully rely on that to carry you through match after match with Tron. So you can still beat Tron, but not as good as other decks that I have posted on this channel, or decks that will be coming up, spoiler alert. So let's go, and we have our 5 basics, which is kind of standard for my deck building mana base style, and most of the rest of these make blue. Speaking of blue sources and non-blue sources, once again I was mirroring the blue-white Shadow of Doubt since I am running Cryptics. You do want a blue-heavy mana base, but in that deck I had 4 Ghost Quarters and 2 basic planes, so that was a total of 6 lands that could not produce blue or fetch for blue sources. And you see that again in this deck. We have 2 Ghost Quarter, 2 Shambling Vent, Plains, and Swamp as 6 non-blue sources with a total of 25 lands. So a lot of things that just kind of mirrored other decks. And in the sideboard, this guy. He's back from my white-black Eldrazi Processor deck. And again, another dynamic that this deck has. This guy can come in against Merfolk, Aggro, Burn, and any sort of white or black deck. Any deck relying on Path to Exile for removal comes in against tokens as well. Comes in against Abzan and Jund, and they just really can't deal with this guy. And he starts gaining me a bunch of life. So a great sideboard card. He would usually come in place of Dragonlord Ojutai or Teferi, is where that usually goes. Once in a while, maybe Elspeth, if I feel Elspeth is bad for the matchup. And I want, and maybe against Burn I take the Elspeth out, since Teferi is 5 mana as opposed to 6 for Elspeth. Engineered Explosives, again, pretty standard, comes in against Boggles, Infect, anything that's Affinity, stuff that's playing a lot of stuff, a lot of permanents that are low casting cost. And once again, we have the 2 Graveyard Hates. This time I've got a 1-1 split on Nihil, Spellbomb, and Relic Progenitus. Against Graveyard Heavy decks, I'll bring in both. Against, maybe some control decks, I'll just bring in 1 Nihil Spellbomb that can screw up their Snapcaster mages. And the Spellbomb lets me draw a card while hitting only my opponent's graveyard. So I do like that aspect. Sometimes I do like the aspect of Relic of Progenitus just hitting them 1 card at a time and just keeping their graveyard constantly empty instead of a one-shot graveyard thing. So I like both cards. Whenever I play black, you can probably expect to see a split on these 2. Pithing Needle, once again, pretty standard, solves a lot of things that I don't like, including Planeswalkers, Manlands, Lightning Storms. It feels like there's something in almost every matchup that you can use this with. Some matchups not so much. Maybe Burn, you don't really need it. But I always like having a Pithing Needle in the sideboard. It's becoming one of my standard staple sideboard cards. Not sure if I want to ever go up to 2 or not. I don't know if I can ever find room in a sideboard for that. Thoughtseize, coming in against Tron, Control, even Control late game. You can Thoughtseize them and then Snapcaster the Thoughtseize. and just do things like that. Collective Brutality, once again, a little bit more life gain against, does great against Burn, actually. And we have those cards with Flashback that we can discard, so once again, kind of borrowing the idea of this card from the White-Black Eldrazi Processor deck. And we have 2 negates, just a solid non-creature counter spell. I do kind of, there are times I have missed having Dispel, but there's also an equal number of times I'm glad I had Negate in there as well instead of something a bit more narrow like Dispel. And we have, well, 2 Leyline of Sanctities, again, pretty standard, same with Surgicals. You guys have seen these cards a lot in my sideboard, and 1 of Smother. This comes in against any creature-based deck, anything like Affinity, Jund, Burn, Infect, anything where I want to kill their creatures because they're low to the ground. I chose Smother over the other options that we had available at the time. Of course, this is completely outclassed by Fatal Push now, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but Doomblade didn't hit, Death Shadow, so there were people playing that at the time as well, so I wanted Smother for that. Don't want Go for the Throat, because when I'm sideboarding against Affinity, I want to be able to bring in all my creature removal that's in the board, and, well, Go for the Throat won't hit them, so that's why Smother ended up getting the nod here. So yeah, this is the deck, you know. Other than those decks that I've mentioned, another deck that really wrecked this was Blue-Black Tesserator. Not something you see too often, but it showed up and I just did not know how to deal with it with the stuff I had. None other stuff really felt worth countering until they got kind of out of the range of Mana Leak. And yeah, it ended up going very bad for me. And then they had their discard, so then they knew when they could get their Tezzeret resolved, and then in comes 5/5 indestructible lands. Lands, so I can't use Echoing Truth on them. That made me sad. That's another reason I kind of cut the Anguished Unmaking, was it couldn't hit man land, so that kind of upset me. And also, anytime I went to use Anguished Unmaking on a creature, it always felt like, yeah, I'm using it to get rid of the creature, but I'm not really saving myself damage. Like it feels like the creature is still hitting me, and I'm still getting rid of it. Granted, it's not hitting me turn after turn after turn anymore, but it just felt bad. And I did consider Utter End, which is 1 mana more, and doesn't cost me 3 life, but I wanted the removal to be cheaper, because if I was going to be using it on creatures, you know, you want it to not cost 4 mana in Modern. Again, I replaced it with a 4 mana counter spell, so yeah, there you go. So this is Esper Drago, or, since a lot of people might get mad at me calling it Drago, since it's not straight up Drago, we'll call it Supreme Control, because it's supremely better than that Drago deck I posted back at the start of this Modern journey. So yeah, we've kind of come full circle, but this is not the end of it. I'm still going to be posting all my Modern decks on here, or at least the ones I feel that deserve to make it here. And so next time, well, we're going to be doing some more wacky, crazy stuff. So this has been Late Night Mega. Good night, everyone.